was just so bad. Oh my gosh. I just didn't have any clue going into it how challenging it would be and also how common these challenges are. Part 4 in this series of the reality of newborn and postpartum life. And yes, I'm wearing the same thing in these videos so far because, to be very candid, I'm recording all of them in one session right now because I don't know if I will have this much energy tomorrow. It's not being blocked out yet, or some of it has been, but I just want to record all this sooner versus than later because so many people have related to me and have made me realize, oh my gosh, this newborn struggle is so real, but people don't talk about it because it's so easy for our brains to just want to block it out. We just don't want to hold on to these memories because they're so hard and so intense. And it's different for everyone. My hope and goal is not to scare people who don't have kids yet, but just to dispel the bubble and the myth that taking care of a baby is easy because everyone's experience is so different. There's so much unrealistic expectation on the internet, and from what you hear from people, it's like, oh, it's gonna be hard, and you just hear these generic things. But I just really want to share more of the details, what I wish I would have known before coming into this. I want to talk about breastfeeding and feeding in general. I had no idea breastfeeding was so challenging. Now that I'm a mom and now that I've kind of like been introduced to this world, I now realize, and from talking to other moms realize, oh my gosh, like breastfeeding is so freaking hard and nobody like really talks about it in detail, and you don't really know how to understand it until I guess you go through it. But for me, it was a total shock. Again, I heard like overall of like breastfeeding struggles. What does that mean? Like, I don't know. I took breastfeeding classes, both me and Alex did. They taught you about, you know, the good latch, supply and demand, benefits of breastfeeding, you know, it's like all very straightforward things. So going into it, I was like, yeah, duh, I'm gonna breastfeed. Like, that's what I'm gonna do, is try to produce as much as possible without getting engorged, without getting mastitis, hopefully. I was actually really afraid of mastitis. But yeah, I just didn't have any clue going into it how challenging it would be and also how common these challenges are. Only after talking to other moms about it did I realize, oh, I'm not alone. And actually, I'm really grateful for my personal decision making, and I'll share more about what that has looked like. Right from the get-go, when we delivered her and heard her crying, which I was like, oh my gosh, there's a real baby in there. That's so crazy. Still every day I'm like, oh my gosh, she's real. Like, I have a baby. Weird. From the get-go, wanted to breastfeed. So, you know, they latch baby on you and you're like, wow, the body is amazing. Like, how do my breasts know to produce milk? And, you know, it really is amazing. The first few days, it's colostrum, so it's not milk yet. But then when your milk starts coming in around like day 3, 4-ish, that's when things got complicated for us. So I was worried, you know, because I was like, are my breasts even like producing colostrum? Because like I always had trouble hand expressing. I didn't really know how to hand express. No one really showed me. At the hospital, I asked the lactation consultants, I asked them to check, like make sure, am I producing like colostrum? Like, I don't know, like how can I even tell? I can't even see. She showed me how to like press on my breast, and I was like, oh wow, there really is like stuff in there. And she's like, yeah, don't worry about it, like this is normal to just be having colostrum right now, but your milk will come in. And basically what to watch out for, which is also what I learned in the classes, you know, if you have clogged ducts or any like hard areas, just to like hand express and massage it out. And I was like, okay. And also they checked her latch, they're like, yeah, it looks really good, you're like a pro. And I was like, really? You know, it made me feel pretty good because I had taken the classes about like different breastfeeding positions and holds. So I'm currently editing this video, and something I totally forgot to mention, I forgot a lot of things, by the way. When I was recording this video, I was still, just like I mentioned, like coming out of things, so there's a lot that my brain fog just totally missed. But one of the things which is pretty important to include was I noticed at the hospital that my baby was also falling asleep often when she was feeding, and I couldn't tell, is she just like pacifying at the breast or is she really like sucking? Like, you know, I had to ask the nurses multiple times and all of them said, yeah, it looks like she's still sucking because look, her mouth is moving, her jaws are moving. And so I was like, okay, I just wasn't sure. And that's pretty significant for later as well. I believe I mentioned in this video that she has oral ties, so it's not super severe, it's like minor like tongue and lip ties, but that's also pretty important minute, and I'll explain why later. After we get discharged from the hospital and come home, she's just crying nonstop. And this happened also in the hospital too, where she was always crying, and I felt like I was just always feeding her. And the nurses tell you at the hospital to basically, best practice is to breastfeed like 15 minutes on each side, but like she tends to fall asleep. So what counts? I was just like really confused, but also really sleep deprived at the hospital too. So I was so anxious about like, is my baby okay? Like, I don't want to fall asleep with her on me, but she won't sleep in her bassinet for a long time without crying, so I have to hold her and stay awake. I want my husband to sleep so he doesn't burn out. Everything seemed okay until we got home. She was like nonstop crying all the time. Dreaded the nighttime. Days 2, 3, 4, I think I slept probably like 1 hour total, because she just kept waking up, kept screaming till she was like red in the face, you know, like her voice, she was like losing her voice. I was just at a loss, like, okay, well, all babies cry, right? And like the nurses didn't say anything at the hospital, so I guess this is just reality. And I looked at Alex, and both of us were like, what the heck? Like, why did nobody tell us the newborn phase was like this? Like, we knew it was gonna be hard, but what the heck? Like, we just felt totally caught off guard. I think a lot of first-time moms are just like in rabbit holes researching about like, is this normal? Is this okay? Is she okay? So I was just losing so much sleep, not only because of baby stuff and trying to figure out how to take care of her. Like, literally had no experience with babies up to this point. The other part was also just like the overall hormones and brain stuff and obsession trying to research all the things. And then when we went to the pediatrician for her standard pediatrician follow-up appointment, the pediatrician said right away she could hear, because our baby, she was crying. The pediatrician came in and she's like, yeah, from far away I could already tell this baby is hungry. She lost a significant amount of weight. I think it was like 1 pound below her birth weight, which the nurses at the hospital, when they discharged us, they said that she had lost weight, and that was something to keep an eye on. So I was already kind of apprehensive and concerned about that, because they said, yeah, if she loses more weight, you need to make some changes and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? The pediatrician explained that the reason why she was continually falling asleep at the breast was because she was so tired trying to suck that she was falling asleep. Like, basically she was like burning all her calories trying to feed and eat, and that's why she's falling asleep. You know, they tell you at the hospital to feed 15 minutes on each side, so that's what you're counting. But then again, she like keeps falling asleep, so you're like, does it count? Is 15 minutes enough? So it was just really confusing like the whole time, and just not knowing any of this. And then on top of that, later learning about, okay, now I need a pump, and figure out bottles, and figure out supplementing with formula, like which formulas, which bottles, like what do we do with the bottles, how do you sterilize them. As a first-time parent, you also are just so paranoid about like, what if, you know, it gets contaminated, and she's literally like only a few days old in this world. She has no immune system, so if I even have some water droplets that are not completely dry, will that harm her and make her really sick? So there were just like so many things we didn't know. I think it was that day we found out that I was undersupplying, and the pediatrician suggested supplementing with formula, so doing breastfeeding so that there's no like what they called nipple confusion, and then supplementing with formula afterwards. First of all, that's a really big deal to be like, oh my gosh, like we've been learning the benefits of breastfeeding, we wanted to exclusively breastfeed, so is this okay? You know, just like wondering all these things, but at the same time your baby's starving, so you're like, I don't want to delay on feeding her. That was a really stressful day, just not knowing how to do any of this stuff, and kind of like having this existential crisis while we're running on very little sleep. So we ended up wanting to at least hold her over until we figure things out later on, meeting with the lactation consultant the next day. So we gave her some of the formula that our pediatrician gave us, and she got like so what they call milk drunk, because, you know, imagine she's been hungry this whole time. So now she finally has milk, and it's like way more than what I was supplying, and she drank the whole bottle, or at least until she was full. She like knocked out, she looked drunk, and then both me and Alex looked at each other like, did we just break our baby? Like, is she okay? We had never seen her like that, because her default ever since she was born basically was just crying, and she like passed out looking kind of content, but we were also like, I don't know, is this okay, or did we do something to her system and shock her with formula? Yeah, that really sent me into a panic when I found out I was undersupplying, because you have no idea when you're breastfeeding. You don't know how much you're actually producing and supplying because you can't see it. I didn't even know how to operate a pump. I didn't think I would need a pump. Bottles, like I had bottles, but I was like, oh, I don't need it, I'm just gonna exclusively breastfeed. Like, so naive. And that, in combination with what I just shared in previous videos about my postpartum blues, postpartum anxiety and depression and lack of sleep, I was just like a crazy person. Like I could not think straight. It just sent me into a panic. I talked to my doula right away, told her what happened. I was freaking out. She referred me to her friend who was a lactation consultant, like a private one, not at a hospital, because they tend to be more trained and specialized. I was crying. I was a mess at her office. Me and Alex, we're still getting used to like bringing a baby out in public. Like we went into her office and then the diaper bag was still in the trunk and she had a wet diaper and I was like, can you go get our diaper bag? And we were just like so clueless. This is a side tangent again. The lactation consultant was like wanting to weigh her. We were like, oh, like strip her down all the way, because we were still getting used to how to even like change her outfit and change her diaper. Like we were so new to everything. Looking back, we were really struggling. Basically, from that appointment, learned that there are ways to basically pump and kind of get more to the root of things of like my undersupply, is it her latch, is it different things, right? There's like so many different factors that are leading to her being underfed. The lactation consultant there and also the lactation consultants at the hospital and our pediatrician, both of our pediatricians, because we switched pediatricians, all of them have said that it's not a big deal. It's really minor. There were just so many factors and it was so overwhelming and I was losing it. And then on top of that, you know, now we're doing basically what they call triple feeding. So if you don't know, if you're completely new to this, newborns eat every 2 to 3 hours, but that's like the start of the feeding. And that's not including the burping, the changing diapers, the bottle washing, pump part washing, trying to settle them back to sleep because they need sleep to develop. And then by the time we were done with all of that done, because she was constantly crying, it was time for the next feed again. So it was just like a constant cycle. I was also losing it because our place got messy and I didn't know how to deal with that yet. We need food, wash laundry and dishes and bottles and yeah. And I also felt so much guilt, even though I knew like it's not my fault, but at the same time, you know, as a mom, you just want the best for your baby. So I just felt terrible when I found out that I was undersupplying and my baby needed more milk, and I was like, yes, I need to feed her, like she needs to eat. The ironic part too is, and we learned about this in the breastfeeding classes, is that oxytocin is what you need to produce more ideally, and nutritious foods, like things that help with lactation. But if you're so stressed, like I was, like so sleep deprived, not even able to function, like I could not even think straight. When my husband would ask me what I want to eat, my brain just was blank. Like it's just so hard to describe. So I'm there like, how the heck am I supposed to produce oxytocin right now and relax and be happy when there's so much chaos and I don't know what I'm doing and we need to do all of this stuff to survive and for our baby to survive. The list goes on, but basically when you have higher cortisol, it inhibits your milk supply as well. So that was also working against me. So I was like stressed about being stressed. So it was like this vicious cycle. I had prepared all these lactation oat cookies and like freezer prep meals and such kind friends like dropped off stuff as well. But because I was in that state, like I literally could not put those things together or like assemble them, and my husband did the best that he could. We did have really kind friends drop by to like help out at some points, but it's not like a consistent thing. I'll do a whole different video talking about this. There's just like so much that goes into producing. You really need to set yourself up for success. We had this plan to triple feed and we tried it, but I was still not sleeping because again of what I just mentioned, constant crying. I'm so tired at the point. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to pump. I forgot to pump. It was just really hard. And I was trying to see if my supply would increase and my supply was so low. I was so shocked when I started pumping. And first of all, because of my brain fog and like lack of sleep, even setting up the pump was like too overwhelming. Like Alex doesn't do well with like manual instructions, and I usually can if I'm in the right mind, if I have enough sleep. But at that point, looking at the manual for how to set up the pump that we rented from the lactation consultant felt like reading a foreign language. Like it was like I was staring at Egyptian hieroglyphic symbols and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to like put this together. There's an instructional video I have to somehow watch and somehow process. Like it was just so bad. My gosh. So tried pumping, was shocked at how little I was supplying. Even though I pumped for a few days and did the whole triple feeding thing, it was like very minimal increase, still losing so much sleep. Our doula, she was gonna help with overnight care, and I was like, at this point I just need sleep. Like I am literally a shell. Like I don't think I can go on. I can feel my body shutting down, because she was asking me, do you want me to come bring her in like every 2 hours? Are you like still wanting to do, like what's the plan? And I was like, oh my gosh, what's the plan? I can barely literally heat up food. We process a lot, and also even with the lactation consultant. And I just realized from talking to them, I need to go with my gut. Like, I know what I want. I just have to dispel and let go of the stigma of like letting go of exclusive breastfeeding. Yeah, I had just gone into this being like, breast milk is the best, and I want to be able to supply the best to my baby. But at that point, I was just a walking shell. I was a zombie and I was miserable. Like, every feed was so frustrating. She was crying constantly, frustrated at my breast because the milk was coming out so little and so slowly. And so it was like very difficult for her. I saw how much more content she was and how much she was able to feed with the bottle and the pumping too. Like, when you think of it logistically, you're like, oh, it's not too bad. But yeah, in the moment, I was dying and I was crying all the time. I also later learned of this, like, sometimes this happens where because of your hormones and like what happens when you breastfeed, sometimes it can even kick in more depression and you get more emotional and teary and sad when you breastfeed. And I actually feel like I might have had that. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's like a combination of how stressful and how frustrating the entire experience was, but also I was just really miserable. And I was like, I would rather be a happy, present mom who, I mean, there's so many other things that we're still learning and trying to get a hang of, that this learning curve, like, it is not easy. It is really, really hard. And one of the things I processed with our doula and also the lactation consultant is, this is not a hill I need to die on. This is not something that I need to feel bad or guilty about. So many people are formula fed. Both me and Alex were formula fed. We later learned, when I asked my mom, she also had a similar journey too, where she said she tried to breastfeed, tried to combo feed, ended up exclusively formula feeding. And then I also reached out to some other mom friends about this, and turns out so many of them also went through very similar things, either ended up exclusively formula feeding or supplementing and doing combo feeding. One mom in particular told me, I think she has 3 kids now, and she said with her first, she also was completely blindsided, did not know it was going to be that hard, so formula fed. Second, also still ran into a lot of challenges, but then the third, she finally knew what to expect, and so she took more classes, did a lot more preparation for breastfeeding, and now she's able to breastfeed her third. As they say, fed is best. You know, if you are in a similar spot and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm dying, like, I don't know what to do, you know, what I wish I would have known earlier before having a baby was to be flexible with the feeding plan and to not have any shame, because there is a stigma still about not breastfeeding, and it's no reason to feel shameful when you're just trying to do what's best for what you know is best for you and your baby and your family. And for me, it was very obvious in my gut. I knew I want to be present. I want to be able to sleep. I want other people to be able to help take care and feed her and not rely on me to breastfeed every 2 hours. I'm going crazy. I can always take another stab at it for future kids, but at this point, it's too overwhelming. There's so many other things going on that I'm struggling with. And my doula kindly reminded me, the formula these days is way more advanced than it used to be, safer, more nutritious than it used to be, and not to overthink it. You can't tell people who were formula fed or breastfed apart. You know, there are benefits to breast milk, of course, but it's not something to overthink and freak out about unnecessarily. I have no regrets. I think definitely it was the right decision for us, because I've talked to other mom friends who said they wish they had come to that realization sooner, but they just clung on to that dream that something's wrong with me. I'm a bad mom if I don't exclusively breastfeed or if I'm not breastfeeding, but it's just not true. And I thank God that he gave me that discernment, even in the midst of my craziness and my lack of being able to think straight. I think in that moment, I just knew to follow my gut in this. So just to close the loop on what I had mentioned earlier about the oral ties, and I'll talk more about this again in a separate video related to reflux. Actually, as of the time I'm recording this part, I'm 9 weeks now. We had a major breakthrough discovery finally last week. I'm so glad. I'm like extra glad now I hadn't tried to cling on to exclusive breastfeeding, because it was also related to my baby's tongue and lip ties that also wasn't having like an efficient suck. You need to remove milk to supply more milk, and she wasn't able to efficiently remove the milk because of her suck and her oral ties and stuff. So it wasn't until recently, like literally this past week, 2 months in, that we've been doing lip exercises, tongue exercises, and working on things that help improve her latch and her suck. I had no idea about that going into this whole feeding journey, and it just played such a big role general, not just affecting feeding, but it affects her crying, her sleeping, her even like pooping and bowel movements, and her body tension and your sanity. Like literally it just affects everything. So it's crazy. I look back and I'm like, thank you, Lord, again for that discernment in the moment, because I had no idea there was actually even more stuff underneath the surface, that in my state of mind in that time, and me and Alex like being so clueless about everything, we just would not have ever known. It's almost time to feed her. Speaking of feeding, yeah, there's more to feeding though. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to feeding in general, like even with formula, even with bottles. So I will talk more about that in a future video. I really feel like this information could be valuable to people like me taking all the classes, feeling like, oh yeah, I got this, very easy. And that's what I've observed from other parents. You know, I checked in with some friends who are having babies soon, like after me, and that seemed to be the general gist that I got from those moms too, who now after they're having babies, you can tell that they realize, oh, okay, this is what you meant. Because when we were talking, I'm like, I don't think they actually understand how challenging it can be, but maybe it's gonna be good for them, who knows. So many people go through this, and there's no shame in making the right decision. Actually, you should be very proud of yourself for making decisions that you know are for the best for your family. Say hi. She's doing so much better these days, which is why I'm able to even record this video. Hi, baby. Did you have a good nap? Oh my gosh, she is a completely different baby compared to what she used to be in the first few weeks. Follow along for more reality version of newborn postpartum struggle that we are just coming out of. Thank you, Jesus.